Now, this very emotive topic, you're at home, are welcome to join in the conversations. Our Twitter handle is at ANN7TV, and our phone lines are also open. Our phone number is 011-542-2186. Would love to hear from you. But for now, we have guests in studio to help us unpack what transpired with the Commission, the recommendations, and the different reactions that we've been getting from the different sectors. We have Mr. Hendrik Makaneta, Director for the Media and Alumni Affairs for the Higher Education Transformation Network in studio. Kolekani Skosana from COSAS was supposed to join us. I'm sure he will not be coming through. But Thabo Shingane is definitely here, Deputy President of the SRC and Study Finance Officer at the University of Pretoria. And we also have other guests on the phone line.
Yeah, Dr. Ramudungwae Tabane, he's joining us on the phone line, and also joining us via live backpack. We have Kwazi Mashinga also going to give us their inputs on the story. Well, let's go to our studio guests here with us firstly today. Let's start off with you, Hendrik. Do you think that the students will go for this cost-sharing mechanism?
Well, at this stage it is difficult to tell because of both the positive and negative aspects of the report. But at the same time, we want to note that, higher education transformation has been a terrain of contest ever since the introduction of the National Commission on Higher Education by the late President Nelson Mandela in 1995. And since then, we've seen a lot of developments, the Green Paper on Higher Education, which led to the White Paper and ultimately the Higher Education Act, which was adopted in 1997. And of course, we know that there's been a lot of, developments. Government has been committed to try and resolve issues of access to tertiary institutions across the board. And recently, last year, of course, we also had the amendment bill to the Higher Education Act, which is a positive step, which wanted to deal with the issues of, amongst others, institutional autonomy. And we must say that we welcome the release of the report by the President, and we know that there are positive aspects, like I've already indicated. For instance, registration fees. From now onwards, the report provides that registration fees should not be paid, as well as application fees, which we think also is a positive step because the majority of our students and those who come from poor backgrounds cannot afford even the registration fees.
Yeah. Let's hear from Thabo. I mean, you're a student, Thabo, at the University of Pretoria. Highly anticipated report has come out. Is it entirely free if you look at the recommendations that were pronounced today? Of course, it's not the final document, but what was your initial reaction as a student who's going through all these difficulties?
No, thanks for having me. I think, can I just start off by correcting, I'm the former Deputy President. I think he's watching me. He's going to get
he must be very upset with you right
very
now.
upset. Former Deputy President.
Yes.
But I think just to frame the discussion, we've made the core very clear that fees must fall. And to start, or for a commission to propose that students be further put into debt, I think misses the call completely insofar as what students have been doing for the last 3 years. Free quality education cannot be reduced to a debt, not in this lifetime, and I don't think it's something students must be complicit in accepting. The report as a whole. Like the colleague over here has mentioned, there are some few positive elements, into the particular report, but let's not view the report in isolation. View it from a holistic point of view to say that what is the fundamental problem with the report in and of itself, and you'll see that it misses, the fundamental issues and concerns raised by students in higher education. And it's not something we've raised over the last 3 years. We've been doing it for years since, the call for free higher education has started. We have submitted proposals, been arrested, expelled, victimized, post-traumatic stress disorder, and all the likes, only to be given a report that speaks about loans in 2017. Take us serious.
Well, let's go across now to our live backpack interviewers, Kwazi Mashinga. Just get your inputs on. Do you actually agree with Thabo that the students are being put into further debt, and that was not the solution that they were looking for at the fees must fall protests?
Well, indeed, the report fails dramatically to address the fundamental question of free education in South Africa. We think that the Commission misdirected itself into inquiring what was not supposed to be the actual inquiry, because the issue was not whether free education is feasible in South Africa, but rather the issue was how can the state and other role players contribute into making education free, such that students don't find it a barrier that they don't have funds and therefore consequently can't be or can't have access to education. So the report from the beginning reveals that the Commission misdirected itself into answering a wrong question. As a result, I agree with the former Deputy President that it does not address the fundamental question, and it will not solve the problems that we are facing, particularly as young people. I mean, suggesting that we do away with NSFAS in favor of income contingency loans, it basically indebting students and to the benefits of the commercial banks. It doesn't solve the problems, and that is our fundamental problem with the report.
Let's get Dr. Tabane to join in the conversation. He is an educational expert. Doctor, very good evening to you. Thank you for joining us. Your initial reaction with these recommendations? I mean, students are saying, look, we've been crying about this for a long time. We've even given them recommendations. And the solution that we got today is a slap in the face.
Well, we are approaching Christmas, and we are having a mixed bag of goodies. I mean, if you look into the TVET, it is suggested and recommended that no payments must be done at all there. However, I can understand the students' perspective and where they're coming from in terms of turning NSFAS into a loan. So now you have a commission here that tried to make a balance in terms of who can afford what. The only concern that I have with it is, again, it's perpetuating education as a privilege of those who can. So therefore, those who can afford to go to university will have to take up a loan, so therefore there's a risk there. And those that cannot, despite their potential, if they want a free education, it pushes them into TVETs. So you have the commission that's trying to feed this whole grass and sphere, and they're just trying to make everybody happy.
I mean, there's definitely layers to this commission and how it'll affect the whole fiscus and, which parts of that will be affected as well. Also, exploring a public-private partnership, has that been considered? Well, we'll leave it up to our viewers. As we said, we opened our phone lines. Charles, a very good evening to you. Please go ahead with your comment.
Good evening to you and your panel. My input on this fees, the report of the fees.
Yes, Charles, please go ahead.
Hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. The report has shifted everything to government, and if I read correctly or hear correctly what you are saying, is that now government must pay for all these. What about and the private banks must take all the money for the fees, and they will be collecting. And the other problem I have is with the TVETs, that they get grants, and that grants is paying the whole full amount. What about private businesses? So this thing goes back to a white monopoly run again, because it seems to me that those that put the fees report that has drafted this fees report has made it so clear that governments must be held responsible for this free education. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. That was Charles from Klerksdorp. Now let's go back to my colleague Abigail Visagie to take a look at how the cost-sharing model proposed by the Her Commission will work.
Let's take a closer look now at this issue, the suggestions on that bank loan system and how it could possibly work. Repayment only begins when the student reaches a certain threshold of income. Also taking a further look, payments only continue until such a time as that loan has actually been completely paid off. Further look, low interest rate to be charged initially and will increase with the growth in income. That's dependent on the person's income. Maximum period limit to the repayment so that it does not impact on the retirement accumulation. That was one of the concerns, how this will affect someone's retirement annuity. Also, students could be allowed to settle the loan more quickly should they be in that position and they are able to. Another issue, those who immigrate could be required to pay off the loan before they actually leave the country. The loan is made available to all students from both the private and the public universities. And a further look here at what else a loan to be given regardless of the economic background of that specific student. Also, the bank loan to be given at a rate favorable to the students. The student can opt for less loan than the full cost if that is what they choose. The student can opt for that less loan than the full cost of education if that is their desire and if that is their choice. And taking a further look here, if the loan is not repaid within a specific or specified number of years, the balance can be written off. A further look at the suggestions on this bank loan system or cost-sharing model. The state will repay each student loan to the bank at a given and specific date. And furthermore, collection and recovery of the loan will be done then by SARS.
A quick reminder, once again, our phone lines are open. We have Victor on the phone line. A very good evening to you, Victor. What is your perspective? Victor, are you still with us?
Good evening, ladies.
Yes, Victor, good evening to you.
My call. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
All right, I'll go slowly. In a budget era, education was for free, irrespective of who's rich, who's poor, whatsoever. Food was for free. And at the end of the day, this very arrogant, racist, all of a sudden, they expecting the majority to suffer more than they didn't suffer.
Yeah, Victor, we'll have to leave it there. Just to clarify that, of course, the views of our guests are not those that reflect the channel. That was Victor there on the phone line. And, of course, we do not encourage hate speech. But, look, these are the emotions that are being evoked by this topic of the fees must fall commission and the recommendations that were pronounced today. And we have a new guest that has just joined us in studio. Stefani?
Yes, so Kulekani Iskosana also joining us here in studio to give us his inputs on the story. Let's go across to you first then to get your inputs on the Fees Commission, your overall feeling about the commission that was released.
Thank you very much. Firstly, we must acknowledge President Zuma, a man who has been resilient in his fight to deliver on demands of young people, and we must applaud him for releasing the Fees Commission report. I would like to say that for us, there's only one thing that we like about the report, the fact that it states that application and registration fees must be scrapped. I don't understand how it took them so many months to finalize that. We, however, do not...
Kulekani, I'm sorry, I'll have to interrupt you there. We're having a slight problem with your audio. We'll just fix that. In the meantime, we'll take a caller who's been holding for quite a while now. Ladies, good evening to you. What is your view?
How are you?
Very well, please. Go ahead.
I'm good. I think one had perused the report, but I think the underlying factor is that those students that can afford must pay. And then those students that cannot be afford, then it should be free, because there are those students who cannot even pay even the fees, registration and all that, who are coming from rural areas and so on. Now, to equate them with the children that their parents are owing the very businesses they don't want to contribute in creating the funds for the poor of the poorest, it will be really unfair. Because some of these private companies are owned by people who have got money, of which their kids are in the university. So I will say, even those, they must get free education. It will be grossly unfair. We have got a lot of kids that are poor. Look what is happening in the Free State. The Free State government took it upon itself to take students to various countries. They pay for their bursaries, they pay for their fees and accommodation. Why can't we learn from others? And then I would like also to applaud the president about the endeavors that he has taken to ensure that he come with this report. But the commission could have helped the president to take a very informed decision.
Absolutely.
Thank
you so much for making that point. A very interesting point, I think. He speaks of putting all the students on a level playing field, the ones that can afford and the ones that can't afford, being offered the same opportunity. Are we perpetuating the issue of inequality here?
Yeah, well, of course, our view has always been that we need to prioritize students from poor backgrounds, and that is what we think government is also trying to do. But I think that we also get a sense that of contradictions within the report itself, because it talks about loans which ultimately may have to be recovered by SARS, for example, if students do not pay. But at the same time, there's a point where government is also saying that if the loan is not repaid within a specific period of time, it can be written off. I think that, these are contradictions that we sense, but we know that the Minister in the Presidency, Jeff Radebe, as well as Finance Minister, still have to meet and finalize some of these recommendations. And I think at this stage, what we can safely say is that we need to, to wait upon them and see what is it that they can do. But at the same time, we also have our own recommendations. We have always called for government to ensure that they partner with a private sector as well. And if you look at the skills development levy as well, we have called upon the state to ensure that they introduce at least 1%, an additional 1% to the skills development levy, so that that 1% can be ring-fenced and go towards a free higher education. So at this stage, we don't know what the situation is, but we hope for the best. We know that government is really committed to ensuring that in the end, our students are able to study in a conducive environment without any difficulty.
Yeah. Skosana, I think you're sorted there. Perhaps you could continue with the point that you're trying to make earlier.
Yes, I must repeat one important point. We applaud the president for his resilience in terms of delivering on demands of young people in the country. Let us remember that this is the president who has built 2 new universities. Let us never forget that in his term of office, he's ensured that thousands and thousands of young people have access to education. We, however, disagree with the report. We think that when the president commissioned the Higher Education Commission, he requested them to advise him on how to implement free education, and he did not request their advice on how to best serve the interest of banks in South Africa. These are banks which have existed long before the democratic government. They've been looting the resources of the state, and it is only fair for them to pay back this country by accounting for free education in South Africa. We are saying that also government must make sure that instead of providing RDP houses, they should not give us free houses, but they should teach us how to build our own houses. The apex priority of the state is education. You can quote Nelson Mandela when he states that education is the most powerful weapon we can use to alleviate poverty. It does not say RDP houses or social grants or loans. We think that we are not citizens of this country to owe ourselves, because we cannot owe the government, we cannot be indebted to the government, because this is a government for the people, by the people. And we are simply asking that to avert a crisis in this country, free education must be provided. And we think that the ANC government led by President Zuma will in due course pronounce free education. We, however, want to warn these banks, these big corporates, and in particular the private sector, that if they're not willing to accede our call, that they must use their big profits to educate the young person of this country. We'll however, have to chase them out, because we cannot have investors and big business flown in big jets who do not care
about the young people of this country. We continue to demand for free education, and we believe that President Zuma will heed our call.
Now, Khalekani, you did mention you being pleased with the Commission actually dropping the admission and the registering fees for these students. I want to go over to Thabo and just ask you, why do you think the decision was made? Was it made to ease the student protest happening?
I mean, just to add on to what Khalekani was saying, of course, you'd understand that issues of application fees and registration fees are the first barrier towards institutions of higher learning. So the immediate removal of that feeds into the particular system. But as I was saying earlier onwards, I don't think we should view that as the ultimate solution, because once you're in the system, then how are you funding yourself in that particular process? Now, if I join a university or an institution of higher learning for that matter, because there's another inconsistency we're doing here, because we're framing the issue of higher learning in instrumental terms, and by virtue of doing that, it seeks to suggest that, okay, TVET is being funded fully by the bank by a loan, basically. Oh, no, actually, they're being funded. Now, those who go to an institution of higher learning, particularly university, although we come from similar backgrounds in terms of material conditions, it is assumed that I am in a better position to then facilitate the loan process in a university. So I enter university being poor. I'm expected to get a qualification that is supposed to alleviate me from particular poverty, but then I'm going to live the rest of my life paying off a debt I incurred because I was from the word go poor. So there's a lot of inconsistencies that we need to iron out, but of course, application and registration will be the first step towards addressing the particular issues. But to reiterate one other point is the issue of the report, and I can see a lot of people are conflating it in the media, in social media, Twitter. This is not Zuma's report. This is the Fees Commission report, and so all eyes right now are towards the state president to deliver the call for free quality education. Remember, these are only merely recommendations to the president in terms of what ought to be addressed. But like the previous speaker had said, I think it was from KZN, that they've missed the discussion, the conversation completely. And so now it's up to the president to redirect us back to the initial
We need to talk about the issue of debt that you have raised, not only to the students, but also to the national coffers. I mean, you know, the government is already overburdened with its fiscus. It's bursting on the seams if they're not actually behind. Kwazi Mshengo, perhaps you could help us understand how the government will have to maneuver this. I know there's been a lot of talk about wasteful expenditure from the government departments. Would that have to be reeled in as opposed to try and find this money?
Definitely, but let me start by saying from the report, there are about 4 areas that I think need to be taken forward, which are progressive coming from the report. The first one is around the full funding of TVET students, full grant to be given to them. We support that. We also support the issue of doing away with the application fee as well as the registration fee. There is also a point that is made about the creation of educational fund. But that one is not complete because they leave it at a level of being an option that big corporates and other international bodies can optionally contribute towards education. The other point that we think can be taken forward is around the expansion of expenditure in education, the proposed 1% of GDP. Those are the things that we think from the report can then be progressively taken forward. But back to the question of free education, we think that the moment we continue to commodify education is the moment we continue to invite more problems in our country. Our call for free education is because we understand that education is an equalizer in society. You can't build a prosperous, united, and successful society based on a populace that is uneducated. And we know that owing to our past, particularly the African people, have been denied quality and free education on the basis that they have always been regarded as nothing but slaves of the other races. So that is why we are firm on our call for free education. This recommendation that you change from NSFAS and give it to the banks in the form of loans, it doesn't amount to free education. It basically says young people who are students will have to be indebted to these commercial banks and will allow these commercial banks to continue to make more profits at the expense of young people and even at the expense of the states, because if you read the report, it even says where when a student or an ex-student is working but has not met a particular threshold of income, the state can either buy or set off that particular debt. So at the end of the day, these commercial banks will continue to make profit out of students and out of the state. Our call is that the report should have investigated best mechanism to fund education such that there is no student who will be subjected to a loan or who will be subjected to a bank loan or even be denied access to education because of lack of funding. The issue of the registration fees to be done away with, we accept it. But a life of a university is not only about access, it's also about retention. So you can go through the period of registration, but only to fail at a retention level because you are unable to continue with your studies because of
well, thank you, Kwazi. We have to move on now to some of our viewers that are on the phone line that want to express their views. We have Joe from Alberton. Joe, just your comments on the Fees Commission.
Good evening to you, and thank you for giving me a chance here. I think I'm a bit worried about the whole scenario. Firstly, this fake news were actually released by City Press last week, telling the whole nation that the president will never finance free education. Secondly, you know, the white monopoly capital is actually capturing us. Secondly, we were told now that by this economist that if president dare to make free education for the poor people, the rating agents will downgrade us. So my advice to the students now is they must be like us for 1976. You must mobilize yourself, guys. Support President Zuma now. Mobilize yourself. Shut down the banks. This white monopoly capital wants to destroy the poor black child. You must. You see, even the so-called NGOs, all those people that talk President bad, they are not on your side. They are all mum. They're supposed to help you. So you must shut down and be united. Fight this thing, because if you don't, you are going to fall, like they want the president to fall. Nobody is going to help you. The president needs your input. As students. Don't listen to the people actually misleading you. The white people don't want the black child to get educated. Like us, we fought it in 1976. Please bear in mind that we want free education for the poor. Those who can afford, they must pay. But all the poor students must go to university, must go to TVET colleges. Please, guys, we'll come and support you. Don't make that mistake. Unite amongst yourselves and fight this thing and help President Zuma, because he wants to make a decision, and that this is scaring him that if he will make free education, the country will be downgraded.
Joe, thank you for making your point. We certainly appreciated Joe there joining us from Alberton, giving us his view. We also have Andreas, who's been holding. Good evening to you, Andreas. Please go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, Andreas, we can hear you. Good evening to you.
Yes, madam. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Please go ahead with your view.
Yeah, I think on that issue of fear must fall, we've got a very, very serious problem in South Africa, because we think education is the cornerstone of life. And then if you can check the report, the government is, I think they are dodging and ducking and diving on that issue of fear must fall, fees must fall. They must scrap it, and then there is no way that people, the student can pay, or they can put into the debt. You understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely, Andreas. Thank you for your view. We certainly appreciate it. Just a lot of contradictions that I suppose people are picking up from this commission and the recommendations thereafter. I mean, if the government has been talking about not having funds for them to be able to facilitate free higher education, and then now they have these loans that they can actually, take from the private banks that they would have to pay back if students are not able to pay them back. Where is this money coming from, Dr. Tabani?
That's a very good question, because we know that we come from a court case and a court ruling. I'm referring to the Department of Health, where it was asking the Constitutional Court to assist it in how they should pay the medical negligence. That's government. They cannot afford. Secondly, we know that there's issues as well with road accident fund as well in terms of how to pay. That's government that they're saying that they cannot afford. And now when we have now the education now coming to put more pressure again on government, as in we will take over, we will pay for that, they cannot afford. So the government and the commission, I think, are trying to find themselves into a position on win-win, and unfortunately it's difficult. One of your guests mentioned something very important, that it seems as if this report rather looked more into access to education and not free education, because of they are trying to cover everybody to be able to enter the university system or the higher education system, as it were. But the problem is the protests, the students who languish in jail, the students who cannot write exams today, students who are still fighting for their freedom, for them to write with institutions, we're asking for free education. And this is some social injustice that the Commission, unfortunately, they missed. And the President and the Presidency should look into that and not miss this opportunity of fixing that. However, I take as well with delight the mentioning of the entertainment rather of open and distance learning. The problem with that is the online learning. The problem with that is, again, it's funding, where broadband is very expensive. We know of the Commission and the competition where it's a matter of MTN and Vodacom. It's expensive. And institutions like UNISA is using the blended learning very well. The problem, again, is the money. Where is the money going to come from?
Well, definitely. Thank you, Dr. Tabane. Just moving back to studio. Hendrik, let me come across to you. Do you think that we'll have to wait possibly for the full report to come out? But did you think that the Fee Commission actually explored public-private partnership to the extent that they could have in regards to free higher education?
Well, I think that the Commission simply listened to a wide range of stakeholders who made inputs. And in this case, if you look at the University South Africa, a structure that represents all 26 universities in the country, led by Professor Adam Habib, the majority of those vice chancellors were not pro-free higher education. And, that is one of the problems that we have. And we feel that the Commission has not been able to significantly take the inputs of students into cognizance. They relied a lot on professors because this is the trend that we see in the terrain of higher education, where the professors believe that they know better than the students and that they can advance better arguments better than the students. But as Shingange has already mentioned, this is the recommendation from the Commission, and knowing the President, as the COSAS cadre here has just said, we know the commitment of the President, and the report has been given now to the Minister of Finance as well as the Minister and the Presidents. We believe that they can be able to find ways and means of turning around and ensuring that they look after the interests of students. But to answer your question, the Commission has not fully looked at the role that the private sector can play in this instance. And our view has always been that we believe that government alone at this stage may not be able to fully fund free higher education. Hence, our call for the private sector to come on board as well. So, that is the case. And,
and I think it appears, from what I've been getting as well from the guests, that the banks are the biggest winner, out of all of this. They have the government there as the guarantors, and the government will always be there. But just looking at perhaps maybe having the government have more control in universities, be they private or public universities, so they can actually subsidize and be able to help out with it. Do you think that would help, Thabo?
I think if we can give a genealogical account, of the issue at hand here. It starts from a point where government subsidies to universities decrease. And because the government subsidies decrease throughout time, what tends to happen is that the university then needs the money from another source, and that source then happens to be the student. So the issue starts from an issue of decreasing your subsidy. So the minute you increase your particular subsidy towards funding higher education, then automatically what happens is that the tuition prices then begin to go down. So we are caught in that catch-22 situation there. But I think, again, it's an appeal to the private sector. The previous speaker on the phone made mention that, you know, we've said it many times, take the fight to the JSC, take the fight to, you know, your ABSAs, your banks out there, basically. And I think it's an important element that the Commission, in fact, is protecting itself. It's protecting these private firms. It's protecting capital, right? Monopoly capital, to be exact. And we're saying that when it comes to an issue of education, particularly the black child, because you've racialized education now. If in your TVET sectors you have majority black students, you are racializing universities and saying that no, the white majority who can attend a university, as the numbers would suggest, will continue to reproduce the particular system that we find ourselves in today, and that is where the problem fundamentally lies. Yeah, because it appears the private sector has been completely left out of this. Do they not have any kind of responsibility? But I think, like you said, so perhaps, you know, as the Commission is still being processed, that will be looked into. But you'd think by now, just from the preliminary report, they would have looked at that. Skosana.
Yes, we think that the private sector is highly responsible for the call for free education. Actually, the government is doing them a favor by finding resolutions. As young people of this country, as the Congress of South African Students, we've went to the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, we have went to the Reserve Bank, we have went to ABSA and many companies. We are saying that we cannot continue to have a country that is more orientated on having beautiful World Cups and hosting beautiful ceremonies when our young people are destitute and need their provisions by the Constitution to be delivered, of which one of them is access to free to education. We are calling on the private sector not only to provide fee-free education by compensating the remaining amounts to the state, but by also investing in infrastructure. When will we have big companies building universities? Why must it be the government alone that must account for infrastructure backlogs in the country? Yeah. We are saying that the companies listed in the Johannesburg Stock Exchange must construct universities and must construct TVET colleges.
They must be held to account at some point. Well, let's listen into how the students have reacted to the recommendations.
I don't really support free education. I think the economy of South Africa is low and very dependent on other countries, because the government will be going beyond trying to grant funds to fund for all of the South African students. We are many, so it cannot afford to pay for all of us.
I think it's kind of fair if those who can afford to pay their fees on education, they should pay, and then those who can't pay, they should get the support from the government, especially NSFAS, to fund their fees. Because on a later stage, they can pay back the NSFAS. So I don't see as a loss, because as students from university, I think we are in the center of economy, because we are the future.
It must be free for all tertiary education.
What we are saying is there must be a political will from the state, and of course to try and push for the buy-in from the different sectors within South Africa to try and push the call for free education for all. So we are not interested in reports that speak to feasibility. We hear rumors from different media houses, but we hope that the state has the enough backbone and the political will to come and declare free education, because ultimately the report itself, if you read the final concluding remarks, it does not do any pronouncements, and ultimately it becomes the job of the president together with the ministerial committee to then make the final pronouncements.
So always saying we welcome such an initiative, but we are saying let's begin to push the conversation a little bit further. We are happy that the report has been released. We hope that the movement will also take the time to study it, to critique it, to commend it where it's necessary. And we hope that there should be a space that should be created for all of us to come together to debate on all of these issues so that we can find one another. But all in all, we are happy that the report has been released, but we are just a little bit unhappy about this income contingent loans and the ways in which the media has been suggesting that this free education can be paid for.
We do not trust the current administration. That's one. And secondly, the question of the report, it was a fraudulent process, and you'll know that as revolutionaries we always say justice delayed is justice denied. The question of a report was a question of trying to delay time. And the outcomes of the report, it's what everyone has anticipated. The current government has no will of granting free higher education for all. And remember, the question of free education is an issue which was raised in 1994 with the first government of the democratic dispensation, raised by the second president, even raised recently, but the implementation is nowhere to be found. So the question of the report is what all of us have been thinking that is going to be what it is, and we've never had confidence on the current administration in terms of giving us free education, and we know that these are the outcomes what everyone has been waiting for. So ours is to organize our people and push for the struggle of free education.
We're just going across to our other guest again, Kwazi Mashengu. Mr. Mashengu, let me just ask you, is there any other example of a cost-shared method in government or in the education sector actually that has proven to be successful?
Not anyone we know of, because all the cost-sharing methods, eventually they don't take off the burden from the students. Now, our point is that we need more participation of the private sector in this regard. There are billions of rands that are sitting in the reserves of the private sector. And the problem is that the private sector continues to treat education as charity, as opposed to a fundamental priority, so that we all grow the economy. We'll recall that the economy to grow, it requires particular skills, and those skills can only be attained through education. So private sector can continue to treat education as charity. But also, even from the government side, we cannot continue to make calls for the private sector to invest in education. As a developmental stage, among the responsibilities that we have, is to discipline and direct the private sector. So the state must not shy away from legislating that the private sector should actually contribute. It must be compulsory for it to contribute towards a free education. That's why earlier on I said we need to accept the creation of the educational fund, but we must move away from treating it as an option. It must be compulsory for the private sector to invest and contribute to this fund, be it through tax or other means. But the issue of free education can't be the state's responsibility alone. We need the private sector to play its role so that eventually we achieve the attainment of free education, which is, by the way, not a call that emerged out of the fees must fall. It's a call that the ANC has made since 1955 when it said in the Freedom Charter, education shall be free and compulsory for all. So we can't then say 23 years into democracy, we receive and accept a report that say no, free education is not feasible, rather let's turn NSFAS and make it bank loans so that banks and other commercial institutions continue to make profit out of education. Rather, we need to focus on what are the best mechanisms that can be employed by both the state and the private sector to fund education so that it becomes free for students. That's what we're expecting the report to tell us, to say the state must either restructure itself, it must reprioritize. You know, the state is funding a number of things. We are funding grants. I mean, we're giving grants to people. Some of them are irresponsible. I mean, they get to have children at a very early stage. The government pays for them. We pay for ARVs, which is not the government's actually making. You know, when people become reckless and engage in unsafe sex, and then they basically get infected, it becomes the government responsibility. Those are the things that we need to consider to say, are they really a priority over and above education? And our view is that no, they are not. So the commission should have focused itself on best method to fund education rather than to say give loans to these students so that the commercial banks can continue to make more profit.
Just in the interest of time, I want to see if Dr. Tabane could perhaps give us some of his final remarks. I mean, we take a look at universities that are charging exorbitant fees. Those have not been looked at. Do you think perhaps if that could be a mitigating factor to some of the expenses that students have to go through? Should they focus on those universities perhaps?
Well, I think the focus should be on all universities, whether they charge exorbitant or not. Because of exorbitant to you might necessarily be exorbitant to me. I mean, I'm looking at the University of Pretoria for 2017. It's only application and registration. It's 5,000 for registration fee and 300 for application. We're talking here 5,300 that has been cut off. Whatever it is, it will be next year. UNISA, the same thing as well, which is the lowest. However, the fee must fall motion and movement was to totally do away with all the fees and compensation. Whether the government can afford it or not is another issue. It's another debate. What we are having here, like I said at the beginning, it's a bag of trying to please everyone. Like I said, I welcome the blended learning on online. However, we need to check into the private where money will go. I'm glad that the gentleman from the ANC mentioned the fact that what ANC stood for as the government, because right now it seems to me that the policy has now changed. It's not the poor anymore. It's like we're trying to feed and help and make everybody happy. We cannot put all students with the same teaspoon and simply say we will stay you with that. We are having a historically disadvantage where they will go with universities with these loans and they will not get a job simply because of their disadvantage.
Dr. Tabane, just coming back to studio to end up our discussion and round it off, I want to go to Kulekani first. Let's go and look at the student itself, because this is why the fees must fall protest started on campus. It's because students get a lot of loans on their backs and they don't have the money to pay it back. Now you are a young person stepping into a world where you have to start working, saving and spending money, learning how to work with your money. Do you think that it's fair for these students to actually step out with an already big loan on their backs?
We do not agree to education being offered on terms of loans. Education is not like airtime or milk. You cannot buy it over the counter. Education is a birthright. It is there in the Freedom Charter, like the chairperson, Comrade Mshengu, has said. We are continuing to call on the private sector to do its bit from the money that it has been stealing for centuries in this country, and they must pay back. Companies like ABSA must pay back the state and compensate for free education. We are saying that we applaud the work of the president in ensuring that he meets the demands of young people. I do not, however, agree with some of the callers who are saying that nothing has been happening. Let us understand that since 1994, free education has been progressively introduced by the ANC government, and we have these many university students as a result of the ANC providing free basic education. We are now asking the president to listen to young people which have so much confidence in him that he must announce free education. But we are taking our fight to the doorstep of white monopoly capital, to the doorstep of the looters, the real looters of this country, who are all located at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, and they must account for free education.
Mr. Makaneta, the TVET colleges seem to have been absolved of any fees, of course, looking at the students. Why do you think that decision in particular was made for TVET colleges?
Well, I think if we look at the burden of fees, comparing the TVET sector as well as the universities, the TVET sector does not have a huge burden in terms of finance. Hence, it is quite easy to accommodate the TVET sector as compared to universities, because universities charge really a lot. And, but we also think that it's a good thing for the TVET sector. But we think that we are really sitting on a time bomb now. And we know that the president, as a revolutionary himself, is also aware of this situation. And we hope that the inter-ministerial committee, which is led by Jeff Khadebe, as well as the fiscal committee led by Malusi Kaba, will jointly apply their minds on this report and emerge out of this situation with a progressive solution that can be able to take us forward. We really do not want the repeat of the 2015 protests. We want to see our students studying in conducive environments so that they can be better people in society.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I want to take this opportunity to thank all our guests that joined us in for this discussion, and also our viewers that phoned in to give their views on this very, very interesting story that's still unfolding. Now, stay tuned to ANN7 for an exclusive interview with President Jacob Zuma coming after this small break.